we've had a criminally negligent president since the first sign that coronavirus could hit our country. And it's apparent as each day goes by how much the communities of color have been disproportionately affected by the coronavirus, and how indifferent this president has been to providing the kind of help which is necessary to deal with this crisis. And we know that compounded by what happened to George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, has unleashed a torrent of concern across our country. And our country's soul is on fire. We have a healthcare crisis, we have an economic crisis, we have a racial crisis in our country that has been unearthed. And we're seeing it on streets all across our country. So from my perspective, it has been necessary as a senator to stand up and to fight for all of the extra help which local communities need, fighting for extra money for community health centers, fighting for extra money for hospitals, fighting for the extra money for unemployment insurance, for gig workers, for fishermen, to make sure that they get the resources they need to make it through this crisis. And also with Elizabeth Warren, to partner to introduce legislation to repeal qualified immunity as a doctrine, to make sure that we look at our entire criminal justice system to see quite clearly what has gone wrong in our country. We're 5% of the world's population, and 25% of all the prisoners in the world are behind bars in the United States. We're 5% of the world's population. 1 in 3 women in the world who are behind bars in the United States. So we have now criminalized poverty, homelessness, drug addiction, mental health issues. And we see it in this incredible increase in our prison population. We owe an apology to an entire generation of communities of color for what has happened, and we have to ensure that we put in place the policies that will rectify it. So towards that goal, Cory Booker and I, a senator from New Jersey who has endorsed me in this race, have introduced legislation, the Next Step Act, that just beginning with crack cocaine versus powdered cocaine. Crack cocaine gets punished at 18 times higher rate than powdered cocaine. Well, powdered cocaine is a suburban cocaine. Crack cocaine is a city. So you can see the disparity. So our goal is to eliminate it in 2021. No longer will we have that disparity. And with it, we will see a big change in the way in which our prisons get populated. And we also want to give back to all of these former prisoners the right to vote. We want to ensure that they have access to the kinds of jobs which would give them a higher probability of employment after they leave. And so what Cory and I have done is to put together legislation which we think goes right to the heart of what has been unearthed in our country. There is structural racism built into our economy, into our criminal justice system, into our educational system, into our healthcare system, and we in 2021 have a responsibility to have our own FDR moment. We have to say that we are going to rectify these historic injustices that are just built into the system, and respond to the millions of people who have risen up to demand that we fundamentally change our country, and that we give justice to all people in our healthcare, educational, criminal justice, and all other aspects of our society. All across the country, people of all races have taken to the streets to say there's something that is fundamentally wrong in our society. And they're saying Black lives matter, Black voices matter, and Black votes matter. And it has catalyzed a movement which I believe is very healthy for our society. Unfortunately, it has elicited a concomitant negative response from Donald Trump. He has decided that he no longer is going to dog whistle his racist beliefs, but just come right out and make it quite explicit that he is a racist, and that he is going to play the race card as his pathway to getting reelected in 2020. And so, to a large extent, that's what's setting the soul of the country on fire, because we can see that we have a racist president, that we have a supine Republican United States Senate that doesn't have the courage to stand up to him, and that we're at an inflection point in the same way we were in 1932 and 1860, where the country is being challenged to stand up and to fight the injustice which is built into our society. So, so from my perspective, that's why I partner with Cory Booker on the issue of criminal justice reform. Why I partnered with Elizabeth Warren on repealing qualified immunity, and why Kamala Harris and I introduced legislation 8 weeks ago now, calling for $2,000 per month per individual in our society, as long as the coronavirus crisis continues. So that would be $4,000 a couple. It would be $6,000 for a family of three. So they have the money for the mortgage, for the rent, for food, for medicine, and that funding would then go into the economy as well to help to keep the economy afloat while we await the discovery of a vaccine. So in every one of those areas, that is what I have been doing, to try to find partners that I can work with on these big issues so that we can advance an agenda of justice for the country. So if we just go back to this coronavirus question, what's very clear now is that essential workers are disproportionately Black, brown, immigrant. A high percentage of the workers in Lynn have been determined to be essential. And they're essential because they can't Zoom to work. They have to show up. They have to be there to guarantee that the supermarket is open, that the sanitation department is working, that all of the work that has to be done, even in a pandemic, is in fact discharged. So from my perspective, we can see who they are, and in a way, that's good, because next year in January, that should create our agenda for us. Number one, we have DACA, we have TPS, temporary protected status. We have all of these categories that, thank goodness, the Supreme Court of the United States just gave us a reprieve, but on a technicality, into next year. My view is that in January, beginning at 12:01 in the afternoon, as Joe Biden is sworn in, that at the top of the list has to be this issue of comprehensive immigration reform, so that all 11 million, yes DACA, yes TPS, but everyone is a part of a comprehensive immigration reform bill that puts every one of them on a pathway to become a citizen in the United States of America. And that we also have to dismantle ICE. We have to ensure that these people don't have to worry that the knock on the door of a triple-decker in Lynn isn't just another ICE attempt to just separate a family and create misery. We have to end that anxiety in people's souls, and they feel it right now all over Lawrence. My father grew up in Lawrence on the first floor of a triple-decker. I went up and rang the doorbell on that first floor when I announced for the Senate, and out onto the steps came a Dominican family. And the accents were different, but the aspirations clearly the same for that family as for the Markeys. And my father's son is a United States Senator. So that's what our goal has to be for every kid on every porch all across Massachusetts and our country, so that they can maximize their God-given abilities. And I know how fortunate I am, but we have to end the deportations, end incarceration during the coronavirus, because that's only going to further accelerate the spread of coronavirus. We need to ensure that we put in place a comprehensive program for immigrants in our country, because they're not going back. They're not going to be leaving. And instead, we should align our agenda with the economic and social objectives which are inscribed on the Statue of Liberty by Emma Lazarus: give us your poor and huddled masses. And I think if we do that, we'll be a far better country. And I think it has to begin in January of 2021. I have been advocating for this for years, and I think the time has arrived. The unemployment insurance program expired July 31st. So the small business, the Paycheck Protection Program expires on August 8th. So deadline after deadline is arriving with regard to the relief in the original coronavirus relief packages. The Republicans have been in denial. The Republicans are split. The ideologues don't want to provide any additional federal help, and the pragmatists in the Republican Party say we have to do something. Neither group has an agenda which matches the magnitude of the problem. We have 17.4% unemployment here in Massachusetts. Our unemployment rate had dropped down to about 3%, meaning that everyone who had been offered a job was taking it. It's not as though these people don't want to work. They do want to work. We knew that just 5 months ago. So now to punish them just because they have lost their jobs, knowing that disproportionately the higher levels of unemployment into the 20% percentile range are black and brown. They're immigrants. And to deny them unemployment insurance, to deny them the help which they need, is absolutely immoral. They didn't create this problem. They didn't extend the problem. It's Donald Trump by his gross incompetence and indifference. And it's wrong, morally, to not give them the funding which they need. And the federal government has to pay for it. That's what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did in the 1930s. He just reversed the policies of Herbert Hoover, and he said that the federal government has to interject itself in order to help these families out. So yes, it's going to be costly to provide that additional help to everyone. But the alternative is unacceptable. The alternative is going to be the ruination of the dreams of tens of millions of people in our country. Just a complete evisceration of those hopes. The Lawrence Bank went under with all of the money that had been saved by the Markey family working in the mills in Lawrence. It went under. That irreversibly altered the whole fate of my family, the generation just before me. And I could see my mother and father struggling at the kitchen table to pay bills. My father drove a truck for the Hood Milk Company. He was a smart guy, but he didn't get to go to college. My mother was a smart woman. There was an immigrant family, an immigrant mother and father, Patrick and Bridget. They had 5 daughters. My mother was the second oldest. My grandmother died when my mother was 17. She was about to become senior class president. She had to switch from college over to commercial course and then raised the 3 younger daughters. That's the social safety net. Am I smarter than my mother? No. Do I work harder than my father, the milkman? No. Could I see them struggling at the kitchen table with their 3 sons? Trying to make bills, trying to make sure they could pay the bills? Yes. And I know that families are sitting at the kitchen table right now struggling to pay their bills. And I know that it's the federal government's responsibility to provide them the funding as an economic life for them to make it through. So yes, it's costly, but it's also necessary for the federal government to stand up, to give those families the kind of hope that Franklin Roosevelt did in the 1930s. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was elected in 2018. I called her up right after her election and I asked her to have lunch with me. So for 2.5 hours in the Senate dining room, she and I talked about how to create a Green New Deal for the country. We discussed that the planet is warming dangerously, that there are no emergency rooms for planets, and that we had to engage in preventative care. Number 2, that preventative care would be a massive deployment of wind and solar, all-electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, battery storage technologies, new conservation strategies for the agriculture, housing, industrial, commercial sectors, and that we could create millions of jobs to save all of creation while engaging in that massive job creation. And the third part of it was that we made it very clear that we had to do it with intersectionality. We had to do it understanding that frontline communities are the ones that are most adversely affected by the pollution. You can see it in Lynn, you can see it in Chelsea, you can see it in Lawrence right now. Those who are closest to the pollution have higher rates of asthma, and they in turn are more vulnerable to the coronavirus because it's a respiratory illness. So what we've done is, by introducing that, is just set off this huge movement across the country. Millions of young people, college, high school, grammar school, out there marching and chanting and demanding fundamental change. Lynn, Nahant, all the way up the coastline here. It's a perfect example of why we need to do it. If Hurricane Sandy was just slightly off in terms of where it did hit in New Jersey, in New York, and it hit us up here, we'd still be digging up from the consequences of that superstorm Sandy. And that's just a preview of coming attractions. So we have a chance here in Lynn to be a center for manufacturing of these new energy technologies, and to simultaneously be able to protect the coastline, be able to protect the economy for the long run. So the Green New Deal is really something that, in my opinion, is going to be an integral part of what the recovery has to look like. We have to rebuild our energy infrastructure. We have to do it with renewable energy technologies. And what we're saying is we have to also put minority communities, communities of color at the front of the line to get these jobs, these union jobs that will be created. And with it, we can have the kind of program that we have with the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, but at even a greater scale altogether. And Joe Biden last week announced his climate plan, but he asked Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to be part of his advisory team. And so now the vice president's plan is far more ambitious than it was a year ago. And I think it's still less ambitious than what the problem calls for, and that I think we're likely to implement. Well, the Massachusetts Teachers Association, American Federation of Teachers have endorsed me in this race. I grew up in Malden. I still live in Malden. I still live in the same house that I was raised in. The role that I played in writing the telecommunications laws that brought us this broadband revolution that we're in, I was the lead Democratic author of those laws. My cousin Mary, the math gene in our family runs through the female side. So, as I was mentioning earlier about calculus and trigonometry, it came with more difficulty to me. My cousin Mary taught math at the BB Junior High School in Malden, and she asked me to go into her classroom one day, and she had 25 kids in there, one computer, teaching math, and all the kids were looking over her shoulder at the computer. So when they all sat down again, I asked them, how many of you have computers at home? And only 3 of them raised their hands. And then I said, how many of you would like them at home? And every kid in the classroom raised their hand. And that was the mid-90s, and that was the beginning of this digital divide where the kids in the suburbs had technologies that kids in the cities weren't going to have. When I was a boy, if you took your books home, even if your father was a milkman, you could compete with the school superintendent's son or daughter. Well, with technology, it creates a great divide. So I instituted a program called the E-rate for the education rate, which is what pays for the internet to be on the desk of all the kids in Lynn. It's a $54 billion program, and the city gets the funding for the schools and for the library. It's skewed towards income in the country, so Lexington would only get a 10% subsidy, and Lynn would receive like an 80% subsidy to make sure the internet is there. So it's the first time that an educational technology was ever deployed at the same rate for rich kids and poor kids. Because we know that the internet is like oxygen to kids, and the aptitude doesn't know an income. Right? A poor kid has the same aptitude with it, an obsession with it, as a rich kid. So what I'm going to do in this bill is to the next coronavirus package, I've lined up all 47 Democrats on my proposal to add $4 billion to this coronavirus package that will pay for kids to get the internet at home. The Mass Teachers, AFT, they're now saying maybe we shouldn't start school this fall. Well, what happens to the kids at home? Well, that's somewhere between 12 and 16 million children do not have the internet at home. And we know who they are. Black, brown, immigrants. And they're going to have a homework gap that leads to a learning gap that leads to an opportunity gap for the rest of their lives if they lose a year, if they lose all this time. It's going to, and they're going to know they're losing it too, because they know they have the same aptitudes. They just won't have access to it. So I'm not quitting until I get that $4 billion in. So the Wi-Fi hotspots are built all over urban areas so that every kid has access to it at home. They get the help which they need. And that's all a part of just thinking about early education. Here, like a very high percentage of those kids are going to be black and brown. They're going to be poor in the America of today. And so we have to make sure that the funding is there so that they get it, and that there's, in general, free early education for every child in our country. We have to give everyone a head start. We have to give everyone an ability to be able to maximize their God-given abilities. But you also have to give them the tools which they're going to need in order to be able to do it. So it's two parts, and I know that it was my access to an education which gave me my opportunities, and that's what drives me every single day. And especially the youngest kids, they're going to be in a situation where their suburban counterparts are not going to suffer from educational deprivation the way a poor kid is going to. And I really do believe that as a result we have to make it universal pre-K and universal access to these technologies at home. Because it's not going to be full-time this year in schools. It's not going to be full-time next year in schools. It's not going to be full-time until there's a vaccine and that we know it works. And so we should think big right now. My goal is to think big right now for these kids. It has to be at the front of our agenda to ensure they get the help which they need. Otherwise, it could be a couple of lost years in their lives, and we'd be paying a price for a generation. In 1871, in 1871, there was a brief period of time after the Civil War, especially during the time when Ulysses S. Grant was the president, where a raft of civil rights laws were passed. By the election of 1876, that era ended, and then we went another 100 years to Martin Luther King and the civil rights movements of the 50s and the 60s. But the 1871 law that was passed actually provided an ability to sue. And you could sue if someone who was a government employee did something wrong to you or your family. And so it's an old concept that then was eroded by Supreme Court decisions over a 100-year period that then led to the situation that we're in right now, where the Floyd family is highly unlikely to be able to successfully sue. And that creates an environment where a large segment of the population says, well, there is no justice then if my family cannot make a public official accountable for a harm that they've done to our family. So from my perspective, the original intent of the 1871 law is still there, that if you are a public official and you harm people, that you should be made accountable. And that's what Elizabeth Warren and I, and by the way, Ayanna Pressley has the counterpart legislation in the House, believe must be achieved. That we must put people on notice that if they engage in egregious acts against individuals, that they cannot escape accountability. They cannot use this shield, this immunity that has been created, by the way, by judicial, not legislative fiat. And that it's time for us to come back and revisit that law and to put those protections, those rights on the books once again for those families. Making them all the Catholic basketball team was hard. So that was a big early achievement. It was a tough league, the Catholic Conference. It's hard. I have 500 laws that are on the books, and in each one of them, including putting the internet on the desk of every child in America, is important. I was successful in passing a law that President Obama used to increase the fuel economy standards of the vehicles we drive up to 54.5 miles per gallon. It's still the largest reduction of greenhouse gases of any law ever passed in any country in the United States. I'm very proud of that. In December of 2019, I was successful in adding $25 million to the federal budget so that for the first time the CDC can do the research on the causes of gun violence in our society. They've been prohibited over the years. I'm very proud of that. I made NRA stand for not relevant anymore in that law in 2019. I'm the author of the Insider Trading Act that puts Wall Street bad guys behind bars when they are harming ordinary families in their life savings. I am the author of the law, which has created a $25 to $30 billion research program to find the cure for Alzheimer's. My mother was a brilliant woman. She contracted Alzheimer's, and my father was a milkman, and he said, you know, Eddie, it was an honor that your mother married me. I was a milkman. Your mother was a brilliant woman. She had to raise the younger family. She had to raise her first family, her younger sisters, so she got married at like 37. Married my father, the milkman, when he was 33, because she had to finish the first job. And so she had me at 39, and then my brothers, all three boys were born in 1 year. 12 months, the twins. Today's my brother's, the twins' birthday. And so my father, the right arm of a milkman, it's a long way around on this, but the right arm of a milkman is the strongest arm. It's like the size of your upper thigh. That's strong. So at age 78, 80, 82, 84, 86, 88, 90, we kept her in the dining room, in a bed. And my father did this 24/7 for all those years. And I was there with him, helping him, but he was the principal caregiver. So this law, which I got passed in 2014, calls on the NIH to tell the Congress each year how much money does NIH need to find the cure for Alzheimer's by the year 2025. 5 million people have Alzheimer's right now. 15 million baby boomers will have Alzheimer's. 15 million baby boomers will have Alzheimer's if we don't find a cure. So I'm very proud of that program, because if we don't find a cure, it will pretty much be a disease that every family in America has. Not to deal with it. And so I'm proud of that as well. So because I have so many, I have to almost select amongst them. But I put Alzheimer's, gun control, reducing greenhouse gases, making sure the internet is on the desk of every poor child in America. And I put them near the top of the list, but there are others as well, obviously.